Today was day 9 of the Karen Read trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. It's about 9 p.m. I had a very busy day in my personal life and I just finished watching the testimony. I watched before lunch live and then I just caught up on everything that happened after the lunch break. Today we started with the defense questioning Julie Albert on the stand again, and we had some really interesting stuff happen at that point. She stated that because it was Brian Jr.'s birthday, her tradition for his birthday every year was to bring him Dunkin' Donuts. So her testimony today was that she left the donuts on his car as a surprise for his birthday after she woke up that morning on the 29th, which was his actual birthday. It's very confusing because she's saying that she left the donuts on his car and there was a blizzard, so it doesn't make sense to me. I have a personal theory that I've seen one time on TikTok. I'll share that at the end of this video. She testified that she had a missed call from Jen McCabe, I believe around 5:55 a.m. is what she is saying, and she didn't call her back, so she didn't really have a clue what was going on, but went over to the Albert residence coincidentally and dropped off the donuts. After Julie Albert is done with her testimony, the jury leaves and we have a break and everything because a reporter that has really just been very controversial to the case named Turtle Boy was in the gallery as a journalist listening to all the testimony, and he is then removed because he has an indictment against him for intimidating witnesses, and those witnesses are going to be testifying coming up, so he's unable to sit through the testimony while they are testifying. Next on the stand, we have Nicole Albert. She is the homeowner at 34 Fairview. She's married to Brian Albert. She is questioned by the prosecution about her whereabouts on the night of the 28th. And like everyone else has stated, she goes to the Waterfall Bar for her son's birthday celebration, but her son actually didn't go to the celebrations because he had originally planned to celebrate with his friends that Saturday night, and with the storm coming in, they moved the friend celebrations to Friday. So the family still got together. She testifies that she went with Caitlin, she went with Julie Albert, and then that's when other friends and family started meeting up with them. She testifies that she left the Waterfall Bar and had invited everybody to come back over to her house if they wanted to. It was more of just like an open invitation. She didn't know who was coming. I felt like Nicole Albert really didn't have her story straight. There were a lot of times on the stand where the defense attorney, it was a new attorney that we haven't heard yet, Eliza Little, the female defense attorney, and she was challenging a lot of the responses that Nicole Albert had given to the prosecution. There were a lot of questions about the dog, Chloe. We learned that Chloe is a large German Shepherd mix. She has bitten lots of other dogs in the past and has a history of that, and she actually bit 2 female neighbors in May of 2022. Shortly thereafter, she was rehomed and she has moved to Vermont. And she said on the stand that she has given all of this information already to the prosecution, and the attorney for the defense said, we haven't received that, basically. So that was a little concerning because if any information that has been received has been withheld, that is grounds for a mistrial. Little hydration break. Chloe was known to escape from their backyard from time to time too, and that's when she would bite people when she was like out on the loose. So that kind of plays into the theory a little bit that maybe Chloe was let out and got out into the front yard, and then something happened there in the front yard when John O'Keefe was dropped off. Back to the testimony from Nicole, she was also questioned about who was at her home when she got home. So she left the Waterfall Bar with Brian Albert and Caitlin Albert. I can't remember if anybody else was in the car with them. I think it was just the 3 of them. Brian Higgins was at the house when they arrived and like came into the home with them. And then we learn that Brian Albert Jr. and 2 of his friends, who we will probably hear from soon, were in the home like partying kind of and just like sitting at the kitchen table. She also testifies and is the first person to say that Colin Albert, who is Chris and Julie's son, was inside the home when she arrived. Up until this point, we have always heard that he was not in the home. We have heard that he arrived back to his home, which was closer to the Waterfall Bar, 15 minutes after Chris Albert had arrived home. And just as a reminder, Colin is the 17-year-old son of Chris and Julie, and he is the one who the defense is alleging got into the fight with John O'Keefe. So there's a lot of confusion about where Colin was when she came into the home. Originally, she testified that he was sitting at the table when she walked into the home, and then her response changed that she bumped into him, almost physically bumped into him in the foyer of her house when she came in. And I'm going to have to do like a little bit of sleuthing for you guys and show you photos from inside the home on 34 Fairview because I pulled up the Zillow, obviously. Nicole Albert testifies that Brian Higgins and her husband Brian Albert, they looked at some photos inside the home because Brian Higgins had never really been inside the home. And that was like the only time that they were really ever separated from the group. There was like a few minutes where she wasn't like around them per se, but they were always all kind of hanging out together as a group. Nicole then says that everybody starts to leave the home. Brian Higgins leaves, and there's like the order of events that people leave. But the confusing part was she said that Caitlin was the last person to leave before they went to bed. And in her earlier statement that she gave to Officer Link, she said that her daughter Caitlin left at 12:15-ish, which is now being contradicted. So like I said, nobody's story straight. It's just all a little cluttered. Nicole and Brian leave their house unlocked, I guess, and they ended up just like going to bed. So she says that they went to bed, I believe, around 2 a.m. and they're just like asleep for the night. She's then woken up the next morning by her sister, Jen McCabe, coming into their room saying that John O'Keefe was found on the front lawn and he is unresponsive. The defense then questions her about phone calls that were received from her sister, Jen McCabe. So her sister called her 2 times earlier in the morning, and the cell phone records indicate that they spoke on the phone once for 9 seconds and a few minutes later for 7 seconds. Nicole denies that. She says, "We did not answer the phone. I was asleep. It was on silent. I didn't hear it. The phone calls were not answered." That's pretty much the extent of Nicole Albert's testimony. There was just a lot of confusion today with her. Next up, they call her husband, Brian Albert. He is a Boston police officer who's been retired. He was a police officer for 30 years. He never worked in the same department as John O'Keefe, but he kind of just knew who he was. Not really so much professionally, but because of their friend group. Brian Albert flew to New York City for a police officer in New York's funeral, and he drove back home because of the snowstorm a little bit early. So after he gets home, he goes to the Waterfall Bar, and that's how he kind of meets up with the crew, invites everybody to come back to his house. And then we kind of get into the questioning about like what happened that night, like before you went to bed. He says that Brian Higgins came over to the home. There were people over for his son's birthday. Him and Brian Higgins went upstairs to their the twins' bedroom, and were looking at photos there. Nicole Albert never mentioned that anybody had gone upstairs, so this is the first that we're hearing of that. There are no specific questions about the dog Chloe for him from the prosecution or about his vehicle. He testified that the next morning that Julie Albert was coming over to bring over coffee and donuts. She brings both of those things over as like a special thing for kids on their birthdays. The prosecution finishes questioning with Brian Albert. There really wasn't anything that was like groundbreaking that we haven't already established. So the defense will call him up on Monday. The one thing that I was going to say about the Colin Albert situation was there is a theory that I am now kind of believing a little bit based on what has been said so far in court, is that Colin Albert never actually went home and left 34 Fairview. And when Julie Albert was going over to bring over donuts for Brian Albert, she was actually going over to the house to pick up her son. So very interesting theory. Let me know what you think. Next week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday will be full days, and Tuesdays and Thursdays are going to be a half day until 1 p.m. And I'll see you guys next week.